wait just a sec. Angry Birds, I've been trying to get past this level for so long, you don't understand. Oh, yeah. Yes! Nice. Finally got it. So, speaking of games, welcome to today's T.A.D Talk. We're going to be looking at creativity, cognition, children, and gaming, and kind of the theme of today's talk is I've got a hunch. And you'll see where that's going. So I've been trying to get past that level of Angry Birds for, gosh, a week now. It's been killing me, and I finally got it. But it reminds me of when I was playing Mahjong the other night. And when I cleared the board and it was all done, it gives me a little fortune cookie. And my fortune cookie says that a hunch is creativity trying to tell you something. We've all gotten hunches now and again. So when I read that, it actually got me to thinking a little bit more about creativity. So I did some searching. I wanted to see what was out there about game playing and creativity. And I came across a blog called MsBookish.com. Now, the blog is written by Belle Wong, and she's got a son named Dylan. Dylan is obsessed with Angry Birds. It's his favorite game. He and his dad take turns playing it, getting through each of the levels, replaying the levels. Now, Belle talks about how she was curious about gaming and creativity because you really just don't see much about those two coming together and what it means. Yet she observed from some pretty creative behaviors in Dylan. So for example, she talks about a new vending machine outside of a restaurant that has a little stuffed animals in it, and it had Angry Bird stuffed animals. So Dylan worked his hardest, got some change, played the machine, and got his little birds. So now that he has these live-action stuffed Angry Birds animals, he acts out Angry Birds levels. A little creative, a little fun, he's a kid. But it doesn't stop there. So on top of that, Dylan gets a little bit of time every night before bed after he reads to draw. And Belle found that her son has been designing Angry Bird levels in his drawings. Now, as if that wasn't enough, it goes even further. Once he gets his levels designed out, he goes and gets his dad, and he gets his little Angry Bird stuffed animals, and they design and build out, based on his drawings, these Angry Bird levels, and they play them to defeat them. So the game has gone from a device to live action, all because of the creative mind of a little boy. It's kind of interesting if you ask me. So what does that mean? What does that tell us? Why does Dylan's story matter? Well, Boss, DeDrew, and T.A.D have posited that creativity is critical to survival and prosperity. It's a pretty bold statement. Okay, I can follow that one for a little bit. But let's turn to Mark Runco. He thinks that it's the flexibility of creative people that empowers them, gives them the capacity to really cope with the advancements and opportunities and technologies that we encounter in our everyday lives. Cell phones, video games, television, even marketing. Okay, creative people can handle that a little bit better. I'm following you there. But let's take it a step further. Let's look at the research from Luberisky, King, and Diener. They've found that it's positive emotions that lead to greater cognitive flexibility and facilitate creative problem solving, regardless of the setting. So if we go back and we think about Dylan, he loves the game, so there's a good positive affective emotion there. He's taken this game and applied it in other venues. It's pretty creative. Makes you kind of wonder where this kid's going to go. And we say that we want to prepare our children for the future. Isn't that every parent or teacher's dream? We want to see kids thrive. We want to see them succeed. We want them to attain what we haven't, reach the next level, if you will. But have we really considered how creativity might be the key to that? So think about this one for a moment. Multiple researchers over the past 30 years have put it out there that creativity is enhanced by exposing people to random, novel, complex, or incongruous stimuli. So if we think about that in terms of our daily lives, how many facets of your everyday activities include exposure to those elements? If you've ever ridden a city bus, things can get pretty random. I know some people have been inspired to write stories based on characters they encounter on the streets. Look at the number of blogs and video blogs and photo blogs based off of things that we see. Okay, so now we've actually kind of pushed ourselves to a more creative society without maybe even realizing it. It's kind of been focused into that venue of creativity researchers. So let's go back and think about Belle's post about Dylan. Obviously, Dylan has been exposed to some elements that have really kind of triggered those affective elements, creative elements, those forces within, and he's passionate about this, and he loves it, and it makes him happy, and he gets to create something. Now, we could call this, as Mednick termed it, the associative basis of the creative process. Big fancy term. What does it mean? Basically, it just means the way he gets to a creative solution. Given all of these elements in front of him, how he got from point A to point B. So in Dylan's case, using Mednick's terms, you could make the argument that the process was either serendipitous or through similarity. So I guess I should kind of explain those. Serendipitous solutions tend to occur when elements are in close proximity, and they're usually an accident. I'm going to take a little segue here. Have you ever heard about how the microwave was invented? It's kind of a cool story. So Dr. Percy Spencer was testing a new magnetron. It's a vacuum tube associated with radar. And he was running some experiments when he noticed that when it was activated, the chocolate bar in his pocket melted. So he had a little bit of inspiration. Through serendipity, he thought, oh wait, I wonder. So the next day he came back and used a corn kernel. And in 1946, the very first office building fire alarm was set off by microwave popcorn. Okay, so maybe the alarm didn't go off, didn't burn, set the whole building on fire, or that horrible smell that we've all gotten used to with microwave popcorn. But the fact remains that microwaves were invented by accident, through serendipity. Close proximity is how Dr. Spencer created the microwave. Now in Dylan's case, it could be that, but I tend to think it's more through similarity. Now, similarity involves fixating on similar components of something. In Dylan's case, he has the game on the phone or an iPad, and he plays it, and then he found the stuffed animals. And he also likes to draw, and he realized he could put all these elements together and come up with live-action gameplay of Angry Birds. It's kind of creative. Now, Mednick also tells us that there's a third way to come to a creative process or create something out of this process, and that's through mediation. Now, the story typically told for mediation to explain how it works is that of an insect on the floor. You don't want to touch it, you don't want to step on it, you're just scared by that roach or that spider or whatever it is. Ooh, I don't want to go near it. I know, I'll use the vacuum cleaner to suck it up, and then I don't have to touch it. It just goes in the bag or the little tube, and I can dump it out. But what if that spider or roach is on the ceiling? Vacuum works on the floor. Vacuum could work on the ceiling. That would be mediation to come to a creative solution. Kind of cool. Now, with creativity and cognition in mind, or thinking instead of cognition if you prefer that term, let me introduce you to a project known as GameWerks at the University of Georgia, and one of its co-directors, Lucas Jensen. So we're here with Lucas Jensen, who has been one of the co-directors of GameWerks, a game camp for kids at the University of Georgia. And if you could, Lucas, tell us a little bit about GameWerks and what it entails.
Well, we started GameWorks about 3 years ago through the Georgia Continuing Education Center, and also MoWorks, an e-learning company here in Athens, Georgia. and the Department of Educational Psychology and Instructional Technology. So all three of these elements were put together to found this camp, and essentially it's a video game camp. And everybody, when I say that to people, often they just say, a video game camp, what do the kids do? Do they sit around and play video games? And yeah, they do play some video games, but actually this is a camp wherein they go and during a week-long experience, they come together and actually design video games from the ground up, which is a lot different than just playing video games, because they're actually exercising a lot of different creative skills, collaborative skills, design skills, and then it's learning to think about video games creatively. Like I said, we still have plenty of video gaming for them, which we call research time, so that they can go in and research other video games. The truth is, though, we do ask them that when they play video games, we have debriefing sessions, we ask them to think about video games creatively and critically, so they kind of learn the design language. There are a couple different components to the camp. One of the components of it is that we want to model sort of a professional experience to take them through sort of a mock version of what it means to be a video game designer.
That's really cool.
We also have a second camp that's we have two camps. The first one is 1 week. It's a design camp. And then the second camp is 2 weeks, and it's a development camp where they learn more programming and stuff. So we try to model these experiences. This is what it's like to be a programmer. This is what it's like to be a designer. And we bring in industry experts to come in and from all around the country, and they come in and say, this is what it's like to be in the industry. Here's the harsh reality of what it's like to be in the video game industry. Another thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to show them that games can be about serious topics. There's this serious games model, and so we actually have them design games that are educational. But let's be frank, most educational games are stink, and the kids don't like to play them.
Right.
And they spot it a mile away, right? So what we try to do is say, hey, listen, this is your chance to do something with something that you liked from school. And sometimes we give them some parameters, but we say, this is your chance to teach something through a game, but have the chance to make that game fun. Work it in from the ground up, rather than sort of shoving it into an existing game design, and so you end up with a game that like Math Shooters, or Rabbit loves reading, or I think this is Math Blaster, or Rabbit reading Rabbit or something. But in this case, they get to sort of create their own dream game, but also have it teach something through it. So there are a couple of different elements working.
Tell me about the Kudzu Killer game.
Okay, Kudzu Killers. Well, it was called Herbicide, or Herbicide, yes. And Herbicide was we asked the kids, and this was in our first ever game camp, we asked a group, and the kids work in collaborative groups, by the way, small groups, typically between 4 to 6, bigger groups, bigger problems, but it's really 3, 4, 5, that's kind of the sweet spot. But the kids, we asked them to, in each group, to come up with sort of a Georgia issue, a Georgia social issue, and we gave a list of them. And there were things like water, because at the time it was a drought, or just happened. And we said water was one, and kudzu was another. We had some natural resources. We had some other social issues. And one of the groups hit up on kudzu and said, oh man, kudzu, this is the one. So they went on the internet and researched kudzu. And they came up with so many kudzu facts. Those kids probably know more about kudzu than anybody ever. I was learning stuff every day just working with them. And they came up with this game where in the year 2000, I think 25 or something in the future, trying to get rid of the kudzu menace, which has now spread to the Great Lakes. And this is true, it actually is spreading that direction. The government decided to drop a nuclear bomb, on irradiate a kudzu. And it actually turns the kudzu into sort of a sentient creature, like one hive mind monstrous being that could pop up humanoid figures that would attack you. So you're getting attacked by plant monsters. And you were Jacob Arrowroot, a half Native American farmer who was trying to get to his family to the CDC. I don't know. It was an elaborate story. But the game itself was based on a lot of interesting things. The truth is that irradiation apparently doesn't kill kudzu, and that some herbicides do make them don't work against kudzu, you make them resistant. And so in the game, you had to kind of resort to old-fashioned tactics, which was chainsaws, and you could outfit your tractor to kill it. And then at the end, you had to pull up the root ball and destroy it. Unfortunately, the root ball was usually surrounded by this sort of like humanoid, lumbering humanoid monster plant. So you couldn't shoot it with guns, but you could use flamethrowers and all this other. So you had to use things that were you had to use gasoline, things that you found and scavenged from this sort of kudzu-covered landscape and destroy the kudzu in each area. The kids pitched it, if you know video games, as a combination of Gears of War meets Shadow of the Colossus with Plant.
Now, personally, I see GameWorks as a fantastic opportunity to engage kids during the summer months with something that many of them love. Not only that, but it's a fantastically creative exercise in both creativity and cognition and emotions, which we've already said are important for development and success. So, with that in mind, let's see what Lucas has to say about the creative process and the different processes the kids work through when they participate in GameWorks.
So it sounds like obviously there's a lot of creativity going on here, and you use that word yourself. Within that kind of realm of serendipity, similarity, mediation, what did you see amongst the kids? How were they coming to their creative solutions?
Well, early when we divide them into groups, we divide them typically by age, around age. Because 17-year-olds working with 11-year-olds, we found it's not always that great. But anyway, when we divide them up into groups, we say, give them some parameters about what the games that they're supposed to develop, or rather design, and then develop later on. That's usually I find to be the most creative period. All the creativity is happening throughout the whole process. But that first day or two, where they're really brainstorming and sitting around, that's where a lot of it happens. I would say that serendipity doesn't. A lot of that happens just at sort of a personality level, where the kids come together and they go, I've always wanted to make. Every kid's got a dream game in their head. I've got a couple ideas for my dream game. So they all come in and they all throw out their dream game idea. I'd like to make a game with zombies flying. I'd like to make a game where pirates shoot lasers. And sometimes everybody goes, wow, pirates shooting lasers, zombie. Sometimes that sort of, there is that little serendipitous element. But the truth is probably most of what happens is probably more like the other two, and particularly in similarity. It's very difficult to get kids to think outside of what they already know to be true with games. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, gaming's covered a lot of ground, although most of the experiences the kids have are with usually one or two genres: first-person shooters, third-person shooters, real-time strategy games, that kind of thing. Time management games are big. The Angry Birds sort of arcade-style games. To get them to think outside of those structures that have already been put in place, it's hard for me and it's hard for them. So a lot of what they do is sort of a synthesis of these things, where they get together and they say, okay, it is going to be Gears of War meets Shadow of the Colossus, or it's going to be I'm making this one up, it's going to be Angry Birds versus meets Halo. I mean, that obviously wouldn't happen. Or maybe,
but it could be a very creative game.
And we actually don't discourage that talk.
It's like to me that most of the processes used in GameWorks are either similarity or mediation. Now, what I find interesting is that Mednick wrote about these processes in 1962. Yet, here we are in 2011 with practical examples of these processes that he described. Now, this tells me that these underlying processes are stable, and without ever realizing it, we're working through these processes. We're attempting to create something unique and useful, which is the general prerequisite for something that's creative, a creative product. It has to be both unique and useful. And here we are, more than 40 years later, 50 years later, working through it. It's kind of fascinating. So what else can we learn from GameWorks? Well, as it turns out, Ronald Fink has a concept of structured imagination and design fixation. And they're actually a large part of what happens at GameWorks. So for a little bit of background here, let me tell you about Ronald Fink's ideas. I want to ask you to indulge me a little bit. Engage in a little activity with me. Close your eyes and imagine what an alien creature might look like that lives on a planet vastly different from Earth. So think about it for a minute. What's it look like? The shape, the color, any features? Does it have eyes? Does it have ears? A nose? What about arms and legs? Does it have those? Now here's the kicker. Is it symmetrical? Now, if you answered yes to any of my questions, I would challenge you and say that your alien creature sounds very humanoid. Okay, not necessarily a good or a bad thing. I asked you to be creative and think about it. Now, multiple researchers have found that we tend to use typical or salient features of familiar objects. So when I asked you to think about an alien, you might have thought about human features and how they would be morphed on an alien. You might have thought about the various drawings that have been used throughout time, alien abductions in the movies, what Hollywood has depicted as an alien, or even video games. We tend to take these typical features, salient features of what we know, what is familiar, and incorporate them into new creations, new designs. And like I said, it's not that it's a bad thing. That's just where we have to start with our inspiration. And it's common to use what we already know. Now, here's the most interesting part about it to me. It may not even be deliberate. When I asked you to go through the activity, to close your eyes and answer my questions, it may have been subconscious. You may not have deliberately said it has 2 eyes or it has 3 eyes. Maybe it had no eyes. That thought process is actually subconscious. That's kind of fascinating. But if it's subconscious and we come to these ideas and we get stuck, we're held to what we know is familiar, how do we move past that fixation? Well, research has actually shown that through the use of explicit instructions, where you purposefully include or exclude certain criteria, it can help lift those barriers and push you through that fixation to kind of hit a breakthrough, get to the next level. So with that in mind, let's take a look at GameWerks and see what Lucas has to say about structured imagination design fixation, how the kids encounter it and how they get past it.
One of the things that bothers us the most, I think, is when we get in there and the kids in this creative process, where you can see it happening early on too, when the kids are just recreating another game. And I say, what is it that we have these meetings every day? The kids come in front of us and they pitch their ideas in gradually getting bigger and bigger, and so that they're practicing for the final day when they pitch their game idea to an audience of parents and peers and everyone. So every day we come in and critique them, and we're pretty harsh, and we say, why is this different than Left 4 Dead? This is a zombie game. It sounds just like it. Well, it's different because of this. Well, tell me how it's different. Take that different thing and make that the most interesting thing. And too often the similarities they're too close. So if you say it's Left 4 Dead meets Fallout 3, these are game ideas. But those are both first-person shooters. It's both. There's just not a lot of difference there. It's difference of degree, but not of kind. And so what we try to encourage is, hey, why not mash up these different things? If you're going to do similarities and creative stuff, and use ideas that you already have, and then sort of put your own spin on it, then maybe take these disparate elements and do it.
But there's the idea of structured imagination and design fixation. And a lot of the kids they pull from games that they know, and they get stuck by that. And you've hit on it where you've asked them, well, how is this different from XYZ? Can you tell me a little more about that, how they get fixed by it, and even how they move beyond that fixation?
Well, some of them are young and haven't played too many types of games. And so there is that. And everybody's experience is different. And we have some kids who are sports gamers, some kids who still play Pokemon all the time, some kids who play a lot of different types of games, some kids who only play first-person shooters. So for one thing, it's hard just as a gamer yourself to break out of the habits that you're in, and you may just have personal preferences and stuff. So that's the first hurdle to overcome. And we say at the beginning, listen, when you're in that research room playing these games, you need to be there playing games that aren't other types of games that you normally play, and think about them critically. What is it you like? What is it you don't like? Because if you don't like something, that's fine. Tell me why you don't like it. Think about that, and how does that inform the way you design games? Can you improve upon it? So that's a very, very hard thing to do, is to get them out of sort of existing structure. So, asking someone to break out of this is very, very difficult. So we have to get that through their heads early in these meetings and say, why is it different? What makes it different? I haven't seen that before. And maybe we haven't seen it before because I can't play every game. But between 4 or 5 of us adults who have played a lot of games, video game designers, we could say to them, you know what, that's the interesting thing. That's the cool thing. That's the twist. You know, a lot of games where it's a twist on an old formula. Real-time strategy games. I'm trying to think of a great example. Command and Conquer series is a big series in the PC world. Well, we had some kids who wanted to teach about invasive species, so they made this game called Fire Ant War, where you had to battle invasive fire ants. And so all the native bugs of Georgia or something, or the South, got together and decided to battle these fire ants. At the end of each week, we have sort of in the end of the Camp 1, we have a pitch meeting where the kids get together and pitch their ideas to a panel of industry experts and educational experts. And then they're critiqued on it in front of their parents and sometimes publicly shamed a little bit. Not really, but they're definitely critiqued, and very harsh critiques.
I'm absolutely floored. I am just amazed and impressed by the efforts of these kids. Video game design is a big business. I've actually got a few friends in the industry, and I doubt they handle the criticism and critiques as well as these kids have. It's just amazing. And the ideas they generate, astounding to me. So that made me ask Lucas about the concept of Januszian process, which is from Albert Rothenberg. Big fancy term again, just to simply say how people bring together multiple opposites or antitheses, something that's incongruent. They bring multiple elements together that don't match, that aren't alike, and form new ideas with them. Sounds like something fairly common that we might do in our everyday lives. In cooking, one of the examples of this might be something that's hot, spicy, and something that's sweet. It's one of my favorites. So, enough of baking. Let's go back to GameWorks and see how Januszian processes are prevalent in the game.
You kind of mentioned this when you were talking about similarity, but the idea of taking opposite games and meshing them together.
Yeah.
Now, in the literature, we kind of refer to that as the Januszian process, where multiple opposites are intentionally conceptualized. You mentioned a little bit, but how many times have you seen it? What types of examples can you give me?
Multiple concepts are...
At least two opposites that are brought together.
Yeah, I mean, there's a constant, I think of it in the dialectic, you know, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Although, certainly, certain things aren't antithetical to other things.
Right.
But I certainly see that, so this plus this equals this, and then you sort of take another one and you bring it in. I mean, for the herbicide game... you know, they had one thing, which is this Gears of War, which is a third-person shooter. It's sort of a roving, you know, very militaristic game where you fight aliens. And then you had Shadow of the Colossus, which is this very often sort of strangely serene, it's a very odd game, serene game that still was violent and kind of sad and wistful. And they took these two things and married them together, even though the sensibilities of both games and the gameplay are quite different. And then they came up with this other idea. And the great thing is by using those reference, which are pretty, even though they're both video games, third-person video games, I still, by putting them together, I understood what they were meant. Almost, you know, they were speaking the language of video games.
So when it comes to a practical example of creativity and cognition, I really feel like GameWorks is both an effective application of existing theories and frameworks, as well as an interesting model from which we can learn. It's painfully obvious that traditional classroom learning isn't terribly conducive to the types of activities that might occur at GameWorks, or a similar camp, because there are tons of them out there in the summertime. But maybe we need to rethink our outlook on classroom learning. Westby and Dawson point out that one of the most consistent findings in educational studies of creativity is that educators dislike the personality traits commonly associated with creativity and creative people. They would prefer to have conformity and that unquestioning acceptance of authority. It stands to reason then that the educational utopia painted by these findings is really not it's not really productive to the dream that I mentioned at the beginning of today's talk. And that's unfortunate. But from personal discussions with current and former teachers, I'm gathering that there's a creative revolution out there. And it's been pushing through, challenging Westby and Dawson, pushing what teachers traditionally have thought of. So I've got a hunch. And that hunch is that GameWorks can teach us something about being creative, being productive, and creating an environment that fosters creativity and cognition and positive emotions. So I'm hoping that after today's talk, you've got a hunch too.